Thank you again, Fidelity, for sponsoring this. This is a great series, and this is, in fact, Ken, the 35th one, right? So it's been going on for some time. So, excuse me. Today, our speaker is Mr. Mark Woodwell, Chief Software Engineer at Sageworks. Excuse me. And he is the key member of the Sageworks executive leadership team, and he has been in the company since 2004. He is responsible for architecture, design, implementation, maintenance, and expansion of Sageworks software products. And if you're not familiar with Sageworks, Mark will tell you, but it has to do with money. That's a hint. In addition to that, Mark is leading configuration and tuning of the company's transactional and backup databases and systems, and is involved in ongoing hiring and training of new employees. But we are also very proud to have him here because he's one of our own. He graduated in 2002, 2003 with a master's. And so for him, it's at the top of the class. So for him, it's a homecoming. So please help me welcome Mark.
All right. Well, it's indeed a pleasure to be here and come back to Centennial Campus. I actually have a lot of history here. While I was attending classes at State, I interned with ABB and was also one of the early tenants in the Venture 2 buildings. A couple of colleagues and I took a semester off to try to start our own business. Although the venture didn't work out, I wouldn't trade the experience that I gained through that for anything in the world. So it's good to be back. It's great to be employed, and I'm glad to see that the entrepreneurial environment is something that's still being encouraged here. So these seminars being a tremendous example of that. This idea that everything can and should be questioned and improved is something that's been a core value at Sageworks and has also really helped us succeed. So my goal tonight is to give you all an overview of Sageworks, and we're going to get to the expert system that we've built and how all of that empowers us to do financial analysis. But we're going to start really with the who. So who is it that we're serving, and then move into the how, and that's like the how we serve them, and that's with our technology. It's a story that's full of risk, innovation, and dedication. So one thing that really stands out to me is the conviction that our CEO had in starting this company. He had a really clear vision of both the who and the how. So who he wanted to serve with the technology and how he wanted to do it. And this was something that really helped him to persist in the midst of a lot of setbacks, to forge a company that I'm proud to be a part of and is the leading provider of private company financial information in the United States. My hope for you all tonight is that the story of Sageworks would inspire you to pursue excellence in your academic career as you find and refine a similar passion. For me, the time I spent here was invaluable in figuring out the type of programming that I really enjoyed, and it really gave me a lot of direction. So it's really important in the workforce is knowing who you are and what you love makes you a more effective, passionate, and a loyal employee or business owner. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and jump into the presentation. Let's see. So we're going to start out with Sageworks today. So financial analysis and data provider are the two primary solutions that Sageworks offers. So I want to talk a little bit about what each of those means. So when we talk about financial analysis, what we're talking about is bringing meaning to financial data. So there's a distinction between data, which is just the raw numbers, and information, which is an interpretation of those numbers that allows you to give like kind of actionable advice to whoever it is that those numbers are talking about. So for us, we're talking about businesses. And you know, a simple example might be one of the things that characterizes a business is the sales number for that business. So how much money are they bringing in? So if you look at that and say, oh, the sales number went up, that must be good. that's not always necessarily true. So if your sales go up and your expenses go up even more than that, so your profits go down, it's actually worse for the company. The company's in a worse position. So analysis is where we're looking at not just one piece of data, but several pieces of data together, and we're able to give some intelligent conclusions about them. So that's what we do, and our patented expert system technology we'll get into tonight does that for businesses. The second thing is data provider. So we also provide summarized financial data at an industry-specific level. And since Sageworks is uniquely positioned to be collecting that data about private companies, we're able to offer insight into the private sector that really no one else has. While public companies are required to publish their financial statements, there's no such requirement for the private sector. So that's something else that gives us sort of a unique niche market and enables us to give something back to our customers as well. So as far as the customers themselves, we service accountants and financial institutions, so banks. Those are our two primary markets. We're also reaching out to CFOs and business owners. Business owners was the initial sort of vision of the company, which we'll get into in a moment. We're also mentioned in the press a number of different places, specifically for the industry data that I mentioned. And we've been published in the Deloitte Technology Fast 500. So starting Sageworks, this is really the story of how Sageworks got started. And this is where we get to the who. And this is something that I think is really important and oftentimes missed for us as developers. So asking who are we serving is something that's always a really critical question to ask. And I've seen, especially as I've been in the workforce, the scope of the role of software developer has kind of expanded to where having knowledge in the business area is something that's really critically valued. So it's not just being able to write programs, but it's also being able to figure out how those programs should work, how they should be expected to change over time, and really having insight into the business problems that the organization is facing. So a couple of the things that helps you to do is suggest technologies. So the business owner, whoever you're working for, may or may not know what technologies could help out to solve the business problem. And you as developers are uniquely positioned to be able to give them that information. Also to ask informed questions. So like, why are we building this? Is it really worthwhile? And how are we going to serve the customers? Is it something that they really need? And then also avoiding unnecessary work. So there may be features that don't really make sense in the context of the business problem that you can avoid building in if you know the space in which you're operating very well. A little bit more technical, it'll help you know what parts of your program should be table-driven. So what types of the program should be automated versus kind of verbosely written out. And a company value that we have that kind of overlaps with this is we want to measure a lot of times and cut once. So you're really helping the business owners count the cost of the things that they're building. Another great part about knowing the who is it provides motivation. So one thing that we've seen at Sageworks is people are really motivated by serving, by helping people. Even for developers, it's important, is we're oftentimes really passionate about the designs or the programming languages that we work with. But sometimes these designs have to change to suit business needs. And so it's important to be in touch with the customer and have that passion driving you as well. It's also deeply satisfying to see someone use something that you built and catered to them. Just a quick story for me when I was working with Sageworks. They kept asking us for special print function on one of the programs that we built. I was like, I don't want to build that. It's not sexy. It's not exciting. And then I went and met with the customer, and he said, I love your product, I love your reports, but I can't use it because it doesn't print well. So then getting to go back and actually build that, have some conviction about, this is really helping people in a place where they need it. So the company value we've got there is if we screw everything else up and serve customers, we win. And the last thing knowing your customers really well does is it establishes culture. So if we're all really focused on serving rather than being served, customers and prospects sense and tune into this and they'll respond to it. So we've seen that at Sageworks in terms of sales, referrals, and also renewals. And on the business side, if they don't need a product, we shouldn't sell it to them. So that's something that's kind of counter to the typical business mindset, which is just sell everyone everything. But we also want to be selling people stuff that they actually need. And on the product side, we also are trying to be really in touch with our customers, doing a lot of focus groups and only building what they want. So that's just something that has really guided us as an organization, and I wanted to share. So who is our market? Our market is business owners. Starting at the top, you can see as our CEO, Brian Hamilton, spent some time consulting with small businesses, and he really found a need there. So what he saw was the small business owners, they knew a lot about running their business. Like they were really good at that, but they weren't necessarily as good at understanding their financial statements. And as an investment banker, he had a unique insight into how these financial statements, understanding them could help the business owner make better decisions and ultimately lead to more profits for them. So that was sort of the vision, is to give them that understanding and to develop an expert system and some artificial intelligence technology that would model the analysis that Brian was doing for the business owners that he worked with. So we identified the need, and we'll discuss in a few minutes. We built the product, so we're done, right? And that's where we had a problem. Sageworks quickly discovered another problem, which was how do we get these products that we've built into the hands of the business owners? So it was hard to reach them with a web-based product offering that required them to enter in their financial statements. Some of the challenges were just discomfort with the web in general, distance from the financial statements, or the effort to reach a bunch of different business owners individually. So we tried several markets and finally landed on accountants who worked directly with the business owners, and we found that was a great way to get the product in the hands of those who needed it. And you'll see down at the bottom it mentions 2 markets, so eventually we did branch out into the banking market, but really the accounting market is where we got our start and where our expert system has been most heavily used. So the expert system itself, as we mentioned at the beginning, Sageworks is in business to take financial statements and translate them into information. So the way that we do this is using our expert system, which uses MultiFactor Analysis. It basically means just considering multiple pieces of information together. As we talked about in the beginning, both sales and profits together to make a determination about how the company's really doing is a simple example. To interpret and provide actionable advice on data. The system really is expandable, so we've been able to expand the system ourselves by adding additional analytics and depth to our analysis. Adaptable, so we've been able to adapt the system and use it for not only this quantitative analysis of financial data, but also qualitative analysis. We built a product for Citibank where they answered a bunch of survey questions, and we're able to give them advice on how to change the way that a business is interacting with its customers. And unique, so the way in which we perform this analysis results in an evaluation that's truly unique and distinct to each financial situation, each business that we look at. So this is sort of an overview of the 5 steps to generating a report using our expert system, and I'm going to go through them one by one. So the first one is data acquisition. So without numbers, we can't provide the analysis. And the numbers that we're going to be collecting are income statement and balance sheet information on each business that we're analyzing. So just as kind of a quick primer on financial statements, the income statement, which you'll see on the left there, is basically the cash flows that are coming in and out of the business. You can think of this roughly as the paycheck that you get at the end of the month. So it's basically counting the money coming in, some of the expenses, and then you'll see profits at the bottom. Whereas a balance sheet provides sort of a different type of information, a different picture of the company. So that's your assets and liabilities, cash. You can think of that loosely as sort of your bank account, and also any liabilities, any loans that you might have. So on the left, income statement is cash flows, and then on the right, balance sheet is kind of your financial position. So that's the data that we look at. And so the next step to the expert system analysis is relationship analysis. So we need this because we can't analyze the numbers directly because they're all relative. So $5,000 in sales may be good or bad depending on what the sales numbers were last month, what our expenses are, how many employees we have, so on and so forth. For this reason, we'll apply formulas to the financial numbers. And there's really 2 main types of formulas that we look at. We look at ratios, which enable us to analyze this period's results, and also rates of change, which enable us to compare the last period to the current period and see how things have progressed over time. So the next thing that we'll do is actually benchmark and score those formula results. So now that we have the formula values, we have to score them as good or bad. For our purposes, another factor that plays into scoring is the industry. So different industries may have different benchmarks, and also the sales range. So these are both, kind of variables that might determine whether, a certain rise in profits or sales is good or bad. And the next is section assembly. Now this is where we really get to the multi-factor, multivariable analysis that's at the kind of the heart of the Sageworks expert system. So we combine the ratios to construct what we call key strings. So these are strings of text composed of numerical formulas and alphabetical scores. Each key string is going to represent a unique set of financial conditions, and we have a corresponding paragraph for each. So this is where the multi-factor analysis comes in, is we're able to look at multiple pieces of data, multiple formulas at the same time. And once we have this key string, we can key into our text database and retrieve this corresponding block of text which we use to build the report. So as an example, you'll see up on the board, sales percent change is a formula. It's the number 10. And M is kind of the alphanumeric score that we give to that formula if the sales have stayed the same. Next is change in assets. So that's our formula 14, and D, meaning they've decreased. And then employees, so the number of employees has increased significantly, that's F. So we key those three pieces of information together. We form a string that we'll use to go and reach into our text database. And we'll pull out a paragraph that's uniquely written corresponding to that specific company's financial situation. And so the next step is report assembly. So you can see here we have a paragraph describing the particular situation that I just mentioned. But there's also different types of key strings. So we've got 6 different sections in the report, 6 different financial areas that we'll analyze at a minimum. So those are liquidity, profitability, sales, borrowing, assets, and employees for each company. Each section has a different key string ranging from looking at just 3 factors, as we saw in the sales example, all the way up to 7 factors in our liquidity section, each with 3 or 4 different possible scores. So in the case of the liquidity section, this translates for us into over 5,000 possible financial situations. And so writing out all of that text is one of the things that makes the expert system unique, and also one of the things that took the longest time to develop. So Brian took all of the expertise that he gained working with business owners, and he really put that into all of these blocks of text that are in our expert system in the database that no one else really has that type and depth of analysis. So that's the thing that really distinguishes us in the marketplace. So as you can see, just reading over briefly, you can see there's commentary on sales, and then down at the bottom, we'll also talk a little bit about profitability as well. So sort of the implications of not just the sales number, but also some of the other factors that are being looked at in the expert system. So that's a brief overview of the way that this report comes together. And now that we have the report, as we mentioned at the beginning, who are we going to give it to? So one of the primary applications for us is delivering this report to accounting firms. So in addition to providing the accountants with the financial analysis that they take to business owners who they work with and handle the financial statements for, we also automate some auditing functionality. So we increase the value of the product for them, taking our reports really from what's a nice to have to actually a need to have, because accountants are required to do these auditing steps. Another application for us has been delivering the product directly to CFOs and business owners. So we found that it's been a valuable product offering for them in making decisions about how to plan their business. That's another one that we're going sort of more directly to the intended audience of our products. Brian often says it sounds kind of hokey, but we really are interested in having a positive impact on the economy. And so by helping business owners, that's really our intended outcome. And then finally, we also service financial institutions. So we work heavily with banks, and it's one of the markets that we've reached out to over the last 5 to 10 years. It's actually been really great for us because in the increased regulatory environment that's come about after the financial collapse, banks are actually looking for more automated solutions, and so they're more open to softwares to help automate what they do. Some of the areas that we look at for them have been, we'll offer them the narrative analysis, which helps when they're making decisions about credit analysis. So whether or not to give a business a loan, this narrative will help the banker look at the business and see kind of how they're doing. We also help them do risk ratings on their loans, manage and monitor loans, perform stress testing on their portfolios, automate the calculation of the reserve, which is a number like how much money does the bank keep kind of back in case something happens, in case loans end up going bad. So yeah, and that's essentially what we do for banks. Let's see. So one of the amazing byproducts of all of this analysis that we do is a repository of private company industry data. So I mentioned that a bit at the beginning. So what we're able to do is, as we're doing the report generation process, I mentioned we're distilling the financial numbers that are coming into Sageworks down into formulas and formula scores that we then use to build the report. So we actually take those formulas and we aggregate them, and we're able to store that in a database of industry-specific information. So we can give insights into the private sector really that no one else can. So we'll group the data and allow it to be sorted and filtered by industry, by geographic region, by sales range, and also, of course, by date. So we're able to track those trends over time. We provide this data essentially to our customers as is, and there have been several different applications that have been interesting for us to explore. One of them has been venture capitalists can better evaluate private companies. We also include this data in our reports, so we use it to essentially make the system smarter. So we can tune our benchmarks based on the information that we're gathering from private companies to make the analysis that we do a little bit better. We also include the data in our reports so customers can look at it and see how they're lining up and where they might want to seek some improvement. We've also looked at different applications. You can imagine having this insight into the private sector could possibly give you some ability to make insights into the stock market if you find an industry in which the private sector sort of leads the public sector. So we'll see like profits went up in the construction industry. That might mean something for stocks of those publicly held companies, and it may not have hit yet in the public market. So that's something else that we've looked at and haven't yet really capitalized on. But the possibilities for the private company industry data is really something that we're really excited about at Sageworks. And so I think we're about at 30 minutes. Wanted to stop and give you all an opportunity to ask some questions. Anything that you'd like me to go into more depth on.
I would imagine something might be sensitive about you taking your data and aggregating and sharing.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we actually do have something, disclaimer about that before they actually run the reports, use the product. And what we found is that they gain more than they lose in terms of being able to see the aggregate ratios themselves and offer them to their clients. Another thing that we will do is we de-identify all of the data. So we're not permitted to use the names of the companies, but we just aggregate it sort of at the industry level. So the companies themselves, sign over the financial statements to the accountants, and then the accountants are really, careful. A lot of them not even entering in the name of the company that they're analyzing, using pseudonyms, company A, company B, those types of things. But yeah, that was definitely something that we were really careful and concerned about as we were building the products.
So I was curious to see that you take numbers and produce text, right? Today the trend is to look at a lot of text, try to figure out how to do text analytics and then produce numbers and fields like that. Did you ever try running backwards, one of the algorithms backwards on your text to see whether it comes up with some meaningful fields and other things? If it's a two-way street. Because when you look at the big data analytics, they're all taking text and producing field numbers.
Yeah, that type of reverse engineering isn't something we've looked too closely at. I think a lot of the reason is the text itself is, I guess, really, really distinct and not as much related in a formulaic way to the key string, if that makes sense. So the key string is sort of describing the numerical description of the company, and then the text is kind of separated from it in that it's giving a sort of verbal or narrative description. So I'm not sure if that's something that would be even possible for us. And I mean, honestly, it's sort of a strength in that you can't look at the end report and be able to go back to where it came from. So we have something that's a little bit deeper than the paragraph has sales went up inside of it, and therefore I can go back to something else because we're adding more. I guess we're getting out more than we put in. Is sort of the short answer to the question. The private company financial statements that we aggregate, Jackie, you could probably correct me on this, but I think we're over 700,000 financial statements.
That's very close to it. We may be over one.
Okay, so yeah, so we're right around 1 million. And I know that's spread across all of the different NAICS codes, so some 1,300 detail level industries that we examine.
How large is your company? How many employees?
We're about 100 employees, and we have locations in Raleigh and then also a New York office.
Variables and just different pieces to investigate. And I'm just wondering what's the next step of Sageworks and what it has to do with the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the applications that we've been exploring is actually taking this private company data, using it to provide a numerical score for a business. And so basically provide a probability of default. So again, staying in the financial sector, we want to be able to answer the question, like just sort of in one word, like, is this business going to be able to pay back this loan? And so, one of the other systems that we've developed recently is taking the private company financial data that we've aggregated and using that to benchmark a business and say, like, based on a quick snapshot of the financials, is this business going to be able to repay this loan? So what we've done there is we've actually looked at a history of default data, and we've done some regression analysis on that default data and tried to predict, like, okay, what are the different factors that predict default? And so how can we look at, just a couple of different formulas for a company and predict whether or not that company is going to be able to pay back a loan? And so what that gives us the ability to do is to give us like a numerical score, sort of a credit rating to the businesses that we're looking at. And so doing that for privately held companies is something that we've done and been able to apply both the industry data and some of our technologies too.
Like the accounting scandals in the early 2000s and with like the financial sectors and how banks have become like more open to having, I guess, automated financial statements. Have you ever come across like a situation where when they sent you their financial information of their company, like something doesn't match up? And if you were to come across a situation like that, would there be an obligation to report it?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't generally do, right now at least, any due diligence on the banks that we're working with. I actually thought the the question was going a different direction at first, which is, is the numbers that come over from the bank getting into our systems like exactly in the same way? And that's that's another one of our biggest challenges. So we have a whole branch of the company that's devoted to integration, which is making sure that the numbers to the penny match inside of Sageworks what they say at the bank. So that's essentially the way that we help banks is they'll send us all of their financial information. We import it into our database for use within our applications. But yeah, as far as reviewing and scrutinizing their numbers, I think they use us as sort of an application provider to generate the documents that they give to regulators. And so if they're cooking their books, I don't know, they may or may not be filling in some numbers in our application that aren't accurate. But what we do is we set them up with sort of a template to where, here's a standardized way that you should be doing this calculation. And so it actually helps them to defend a little bit more strongly the calculations that they're making because they fit into this sort of standardized approach that Sageworks offers. Yeah, I don't think we've had an instance where we've been able to spot something like that our customers are doing because we're not looking at their financials from that lens. It does kind of remind me though of something we have been able to highlight with our expert system. We also have an application to analyze public companies. And I don't know how many of you all are familiar with the Enron scandal that happened. And basically what we did was we pointed our expert system at their financial statements, and it was kind of eerie. It had a sentence in there that says, it looks like some money may be going outside of the operating cycle, and you may want to look at this. So it's interesting. The tools do have the ability to sort of spot that type of, those types of errors.
Oh, is there a lower bound on how small a company can be that meaningful to analyze your software?
No, there's really no lower bounds. We do stratify the benchmarks and the way that we do the analysis based on sales ranges. So we'll divide companies up into less than, I don't know, it's less than 100,000, less than 500,000 in revenue, and sort of anyone below that mark, they can use the system. But that's really one of the neat features about the system is since it's doing these evaluations based on formulas and benchmarks, we're not going to be restricted to any numerical any kind of numerical limits.
Technology stack that this is all very database and
Yeah, so we're actually a Microsoft shop. When I first joined Sageworks, everything was written in VB6 and COM, and then about 5 or 6 years ago, we were able to rewrite everything into ASP.NET, and so we're all in ASP.NET, C# now. And then the database that we work with is SQL Server 2008. So it's been really helpful for us just because one of the key things is making our system useful to a lot of the customers, and a lot of them are working with older versions of Windows, and they need ability to export into Word and Excel. So working with Microsoft Stack has enabled us to bring in some third-party software providers, that have allowed us to integrate our solutions in different directions. So providing like easy export to those different platforms.
What kind of evaluation do you use to see if the assessments you make about make that company successful?
Yes, we do have a projection tool that we use, but as far as going back and sort of following up to see if the predictions that tool makes are accurate, I don't know that we do. It's not so much predictive as it is a report card though. So it's like we're basically telling you the state of your finances today. And the projection stuff, it's just going to depend on the assumptions that the end user's making within the context of that particular tool. But as far as like going to the business and asking them, does this analysis suit your financial situation, or does this analysis make sense for your financial situation? That's something that we're kind of relying on the expertise of Brian and the experience that he's had in the back end developing the product. And so the core of the system hasn't really changed since that point in time. I guess it was about 10 years ago. So that's kind of something that's our bread and butter and that we stand on. And we haven't gotten too much feedback that says the system's giving me sort of errant assumptions or conclusions. So that's not something that we've especially dealt with in particular.
Sort of a follow-up to that, is there any notion that you'll ever do predictive analysis? It just seems with this vast amount of data and going back and forth through pointing it at the public, but I'm sure companies like, I don't know, Fidelity might be wanting to do that.
Yeah, so we've done that a few times. The construction industry is one example. We actually looked at, whether our data would be able to reliably predict trends, in those sectors. We did find a correspondence where, Sageworks data led that particular financial sector in a couple of different instances. But it's not something we've really monetized or capitalized on. We use it within the context of our applications to allow some of our customers to do financial projections. So a lot of the accountants that use our software, they want to sit with their business owners and say, what are things going to look like for you next year? Let's enter some assumptions in and get a projection that we can work with. And so we use the data to do that. But yeah, as far as any investing applications, it's not something that we have created yet, but it's definitely something that we've looked into and studied and would be interested in doing more work with.
So has the software ever been used to evaluate the rationality of market reactions. I think, in fact, recently Apple announced a $7 billion profit in the last quarter, and the market decided that wasn't good enough, so the stock dropped. It seems like, basing purely on one of these factors, and there's so many variables, that might not have been a good market reaction.
Yeah, so another thing that we can do within the public company valuation tool is we can go and look at the company and do an analysis on them and see like whether the shares are overpriced or underpriced. And we've actually got a separate section in our public company analysis tool that'll speak to that a little bit. So it'll basically project the cash flows of the company, use those cash flows to value the company, and then say like, based on that, based on the value of the company and the shares outstanding, is this share price something that's accurate? We give some commentary there. So one of the press appearances Brian was on shortly after Facebook's IPO came out, he was saying how it looked like the shares may have been overvalued a bit, and then of course we saw how that played out.
Do you have an R&D section, or do you have a group of people that sort of look at new algorithms, or is that sort of kind of organic happening?
Yeah, a lot of that happens organically. One of the things that's really unique about Sageworks is we do still have that kind of entrepreneurial side to the company. So a couple of ways that's played out for us has been we've actually recently started a new company up in New York where we're looking to connect borrowers and lenders together using the probability of default scoring that I had mentioned. We're trying to connect borrowers and lenders together and automate that process. So instead of having a bank in the middle, we would be electronically connecting borrowers and lenders and brokering transactions that way. So that's one of our recent ventures. But a lot of that stuff happens organically. So it comes from being close to the customers and really listening to them in focus groups. What might be like a good market, a next kind of logical extension of the company, and a new direction that we could go.
Could you actually do that for individuals rather than companies?
I'm not sure. I mean, in theory, it seems like you definitely could, but I don't know all of if there's different liabilities involved there. Differs depending on the market. So in the accounting space, we've got some of the accounting packages that we've competed against in the past. Creative Solutions was one, and there was a point at which they had offered to buy out the company. Also, sort of QuickBooks, but not really. They don't especially do the type of analysis that we do. But one of the things that's really differentiated us is being a web-based application provider. So we can publish changes to our applications very quickly. And one of the things that we're really proud of is that we release updates to all of our products roughly every 2 months or so. So that's given us a real competitive advantage. And also, as I mentioned, the industry data is something else that's kept us sort of on the cutting edge. On the banking side, some of the core system providers offer competing functionalities. So look at like Moody's and Baker Hill are two examples. But again, the core systems do slightly more or different things than Sageworks. And so a lot of times they do one thing really well and we do one thing really well. And it's just a matter of the customers choosing whether their version of our applications is good enough.
In data security?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So all of our systems, all of our servers are housed in an off-site secure location. And we work with Windstream Hosted Solutions in that. So we've got servers here in Cary, and then also our production servers over in Charlotte. All of the data that's coming to and from the banks is encrypted before it leaves the bank and then decrypted once it gets over to Sageworks. In addition, it's also transmitted over HTTPS, so we've got kind of an added layer of security there as well. The data in our backups for our database is all encrypted, and so the only thing that's not encrypted is going to be the hot live version of the data, and that's standard practice. And even within that, we've got encrypted passwords, so there's no real way to look, even if you had access to the database, to look in and see another user's password for that. We also have a couple of different intrusion detection systems set up, so we're proactively blocking any attacks that are coming in against our sites and servers. Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for this opportunity. It's been a pleasure for me to have an opportunity to talk about Sageworks. Working in a small company has really been something that's kept me growing both personally and professionally, and something I'd highly recommend. The dynamic nature of a growing company allows you to explore a lot of different roles, continue the learning process that I think really is one of the core passions of all developers. It's also been a pleasure to come here and give something back to the university that I received so much from. In addition to attending school here, after joining Sageworks, we've been able to hire and benefit from a lot of talented developers who come out of this program. So if you are a developer and you're interested, I'd love to connect and exchange contact information. We're not actively hiring right now, but as things progress, and they surely have gone this way over the past 10 years, that we'll be looking for developers again really soon. And those of you who are in the program here, you're really surrounded by a talented group of professors and students. The specialized training, networking, and internships available through this institution will prepare you well for your career. And I'd encourage each of you to pursue these while you're here. So I'm certainly someone who's benefited from the program at State, and also hope that this talk's been helpful for you. So thanks a lot.